All right, hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another FNAF stream, and it's been a while. But before we get into it, first of all, I did just come from a workout, not sponsored by Adidas anyway, but I just came from a workout, just worked out and worked out on my body, and now I'm about to work out my mind because we're doing another FNAF video. I don't know if that was bars, or I don't know if that was cringe, or that was ore farming. I don't know. But back for another FNAF video. And this one, as you can see by the title, is all about Charlotte, Charlie, / the Marionette, / the puppet. And I would imagine a lot more of these videos are going to come out because of the FNAF 2 movie. Because obviously the FNAF 2 movie, the puppet was the main character. So I feel like following the movie, now despite the movie having a different timeline and not following everything in line with the games and books, it's its own timeline, its own universe, its own canonicy versus continuity. I feel like the movie is causing us to look back and being like, is the puppet more important than we realize? Which sounds crazy, but hey, I'm just saying. The puppet did some things that was not normally seen in the games and the books up until the movie came out, which that just makes it confusing, but also addicting. So let's just jump into it.
Charlotte Emily is a name that most FNAF fans know and at least know a good bit about her character, but the information around her is so messy and speculative that it often gets confusing to actually talk about who Charlotte Emily is. And for those less in the know, the Marionette is an even bigger enigma. So I thought another Rye lists all the direct lore and relevant speculation about a character and there shows a mini timeline about them video would be fitting here. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. To go chronologically by game for the lore here would be admittedly so confusing that it would be unhelpful. So let's start with how we know this character even exists, and then we'll go game by game. In FNAF 6, the main ending of the game has a very downtrodden man give us a monologue as to why he set up all of FNAF 6. And in the monologue, he says this.
He's Cassette Man.
My daughter, if you can hear me, I knew you would return as well.
In essence, this is telling us that the guy who set up FNAF 6 has a daughter who was killed by William Afton, who goes on to possess the Marionette and then help the other spirits of the MCI. I just went over this in the Henry video, but plenty of the evidence here points to that man giving the monologue being Henry Emily from the Silver Eyes, the co-owner of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. In the books, he had a daughter named Charlotte who was killed by William Afton. Now, in the books, he then recreates her as a robot and it's this whole messy thing, but the important thing to know.
And I did talk about that, Charlotte's backstory, in my Resident Evil Requiem playthrough. I said it, if I'm not mistaken, in the final episode. Yeah, it was the final episode because we were talking about the clones, and it was when we had the robot kids. But I talked about how following Charlotte's death in the books, because we haven't seen the games yet. Well, maybe, who knows. But in the books, after Charlotte dies by William Afton, Henry, being struck by grief, but also being a genius animatronic inventor, he rebuilds his dead child in robot form. But he couldn't just stop at, you know what, I'm going to build my now dead child in robot form and then call it a day. I'm not going to build just one form. I'm going to do multiple forms and multiple stages and multiple ages of life forms. So you have like infant, baby, kindergartner, elementary school, middle school, high school, teenage, puberty, college age. Like throughout all these life stages is different robots for different ages. And not only that, but another part of the Resident Evil Requiem is the character Grace. was believed that the woman, I can't remember her name, was her mother. And I also connected that to Charlotte's backstory because, again, not only were the robots created in multiple stages, but they also had memories implanted in them to make them feel human, that they've been alive this entire time, even though they were a robot. That was the big twist in the books, is that, oh, the protagonist that you follow, who is Charlotte, has been a robot this whole time. They've been dead for years. So that's the big twist.
Was that likely the "my daughter" referenced here is Charlotte Emily, and in the game's continuity, she possesses the Marionette. And according to this monologue, she, as the Marionette, is the thing that helped allow the MCI victims to possess the animatronic suits.
Give gifts, give life from FNAF 2.
So with that information in mind, that this child is Charlotte Emily who's possessing the Marionette, where does this character crop up outside of the FNAF 6 monologue? A majority of information about Charlotte comes from...
Also, I just realized that we are ASIN followers on Twitch. And so we're talking about FNAF, I'm just going to bring it up. The Bite of 87. Alright, back to the regular scheduled programming.
FNAF 2. Most of the death minigames center or at least feature Charlotte Emily before and after her death. Give Gifts, Give Life is essentially the game showing us that as the Marionette, she assisted the missing child incident victims in possessing their animatronic suits. Now, some people take this minigame as her literally shoving the bodies into the suits. I don't think that makes much sense. I think it's much more likely that we're going off of the logic of Alone Together. In that Tales in the Pizzaplex book, it's explained that when somebody dies and their body remains unfound, that spirit might not have their own memories.
Before we continue, the whole who in the series puts the dead kids from the MCI missing children's incident, where William Afton in a spring-locked Golden Bonnie suit in like the 1985 Into the Pit era that we saw in, well, Into the Pit, but also in the opening scene in the FNAF 2 movie, luring 5 kids to a back room, killing them, and their bodies are never to be found, hence that why they are missing. It's always been confusing of who actually puts the kids' bodies in the suits and gives them new life in animatronic form. Is it William Afton putting them in the suits because he doesn't want the kids' bodies to be found so he can get away with literal child murder? Or was it Charlotte, who is, as we saw in the minigame, give gifts, give life? Because not only is the puppets bots in the prize counter, and it is trained to give gifts to kids to make them happy, it's a reflex. So, who is it? Right? Is it William Afton or is it Charlotte? But you also have to remember, not only that, in the missing children's incident, we also know that Charlotte dies in a separate area than the 5 kids in the missing children's incident. The 5 kids are lured to a back room and killed. Charlotte has always been on the outside. They are killed in the alleyway like we see in the FNAF 2 minigame, but also in more high res, I guess, even though it's still an 8-bit minigame, in the alleyway in the security puppet minigame in FNAF 6. In the FNAF 2 movie, they are stabbed and then killed on stage in the opening scene. So they've always been killed separately. They've never been one of the 5 kids lured to the back room and killed. The 5 kids lured to the back room has always been Gabriel, Jeremy, Fritz, Susie. They have always been those. Charlotte has always been on the outside, and then Cassidy has always been the one who possessed Golden Freddy, or at least one of them possesses Golden Freddy, and they've been the vengeful spirit because William Afton was way more brutal in Cassidy's murder than the rest, and that's what made them vengeful. But it has always been confusing. It's always gone back and forth of, oh, William Afton stuffed the bodies in suits to hide the child murder so he can get away with it and keep killing more kids. Or it's Charlotte doing it because they've been the good character. They've always been the one trying to thwart William Afton's plans in child murder and trying to give the kids new life to try to exact revenge on William Afton and try to, banish him to hell as we see in Custom Night. So it's always been confusing. It's always gone back and forth of who's done it.
They might not even realize they're dead. It takes that spirit finding their own body to know. And in many iterations of the MCI, the spirits are not aware that they're dead. They're simply playing at Freddy's, unaware that anything's happened. So I think the most likely real-life version of what this minigame is...
And we saw that play out in the FNAF movie. Well, FNAF 1 at least. Abby brings all the animatronics to that big drawing board. And I can't remember. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, and I actually do want to rewatch the FNAF 1 and FNAF 2 movie, especially leading up to the FNAF 3 movie, which I think comes out next year. Hopefully. But either she draws it or she points to a drawing of the yellow man in the rabbit suit is responsible for you being killed and you being stuffed in the animatronic suits. And that's when Matthew Lillard, William Afton, gets the spring lock skewered ending. And he says, yeah, kind of like, I will always put you back together.
Saying is that Charlotte, as the Marionette, someone whose body was left out in an alleyway, which we'll get to, has her memories. And when those spirits show up and don't have theirs, she helps them find their bodies, get their memories back, and allow them to then possess the animatronics. Okay, now,
Sponsor segment, and we are skipping this. We are not Spawn.
In Save Them, we see the Marionette leading Withered Freddy to try and stop William Afton from doing what he's doing. This has a lot of implications, but it seems like Charlotte is actively working against William Afton. And most notably, in Take Cake to the Children, we see Charlotte Emily outside of a Freddy's or Fazbear restaurant, William Afton roll up in a car, kill her, and drive away.
Midnight Motorist.
Now, this minigame does spark an intense debate. What restaurant is this? Some people argue it's Fredbear's. After all, the layout is very basic and we only see this bear-like animatronic, which could be Freddy or Fredbear. It's hard to tell with these graphics. Other people try to use the timeline to argue that it's Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Admittedly, there's not much evidence for either side. At least, not yet. Before we move on from FNAF 2, I should mention that she also pops up here in these between night cutscenes, but like just the one time, and it's really confusing, not super helpful. Notably, that is the FNAF 1 Freddy's though. So like, is this the original Freddy's location, or was the Marionette at the FNAF 1 Freddy's? That's another debate. In FNAF 3, while less direct, we do get mentions of the Marionette throughout the Happiest Day minigames. Depending on what Happiest Day minigame you're playing as a different animatronic. However, in the main Happiest Day minigame, we're playing as a spirit wearing the puppet mask. And I think it's not too far of a stretch to assume that anything we're playing in the Happiest Day minigames is that spirit, aka Charlotte Emily is the one trying to create the happiest day for the crying child. There's also this,
because we know when you bring the cake to the dead kid, their face goes from like a dead kid to a Golden Freddy mask, because their birthday was cut short following the, infamous Bite of 87 versus Bite of 83 Night 5 minigame in FNAF 4. Their birthday was cut short.
this rare Easter egg where the Marionette can appear in one of the FNAF 3 hallways. notably with a reflection, so some people use this to argue that the marionette was lurking at that location, likely looking for William Afton.
You do have to remember it's phantoms, and it was hallucinations, and every animatronic except for Springtrap is, well, a hallucination, so they're not real. Like, for instance, you have, in this frame, this is the FNAF 2 puppet. Right, FNAF 2 puppet. It looks clean, looks fully polished, but then when the puppet shows up, if you linger on the camera long enough, in a close-up, the puppet's mask is like fully decayed and burned. Right? And then you have like Chica is the FNAF 1 Chica because you can see the bib. So it's like FNAF 2 puppet, but then it's like FNAF 1 Chica. Because they're hallucinations.
Now, there's not really any mentions of Charlotte Emily or the Marionette in FNAF 4 or sister location.
FNAF 4, the obvious tease would be Night Marion, but obviously Night Marion is not canon. So, Charlotte, no. Sister location. I mean, I remember leading up to sister location, the recurring theory and the big hype going to sister location was Ennard was the new puppet. Because, well, they also had a white mask with rosy cheeks on it. And people took a teaser image showing Ennard very literally, because leading up to this location, there was like a tagline, there's a little bit of me in every body, and every body, there was a space in between those two words. It wasn't everybody, it was every body, quite literally, because as we know, now that we played this location, the whole point of this location was a trap. It was all the animatronics taking a piece of them and putting it into a conglomeration that was Ennard, and Ennard using your player character, which we assume to be Michael Afton, night by night, having you trust the voice of Circus Baby, you doing these tasks, to trust Baby as much as possible, and to not trust Andy Field hand unit as much as possible, to get you to go into night 5, go into scooping room because you trusted Baby's voice, and then they scoop you and then use you as a skin suit to leave the sister location bunker. Right? So we now know that's what the tagline meant of there's a little bit of me in every body. But that was also cut to the puppet because, as I said before, there was always been this confusion of what does the give gifts give life minigame? Who is putting the bodies in the suits? And once again, we've always assumed that if it is true that it's the puppet / Charlotte putting the kids in the suits, giving them life in animatronic robot form, as we hear in like death lines from Ultimate Custom Night from the puppet, they say stuff like, you know, the others are like animals, but I am still fully aware. Like, they are above all these other animatronics, right? These other animatronics are just like animals. They are just going from their programming, but the puppet is more aware of what's going on.
But that does bring us back to 6, where the monologue is not the only time she's brought up, because of the security puppet minigame. If you play enough, you can get this Easter egg, where one girl is locked outside and bullies have prevented the marionette from going to fetch her. Eventually the marionette breaks out, but by that time she's left the window. It hunts her down, but when it gets to her, it's too late, and the little girl is dead in the alleyway. the heavy rain shutting down the marionette as it collapses on top of her. It's heavily implied that this is when Charlotte Emily possesses the marionette. After all, she died and then had an animatronic essentially die on top of her. So yeah, that tracks.
It also is what we see in the opening of FNAF 2, which was, once again, awesome.
Moving on to FNAF World, this is definitely more speculative, but there's no real good other place to put it. Because the thing is, there's no real direct mentions of Charlotte Emily or the marionette in FNAF World. But there's a lot of references to the Happiest Day minigames in FNAF World. In fact, Doing the Clock Ending is essentially recreating Happiest Day from FNAF 3, but in FNAF World. And if the Happiest Day is something that was likely done by Charlotte Emily, then can we extend that logic to the entirety of FNAF World? That FNAF World is something created by Charlotte Emily. I think it's possible when using evidence we find in Ultimate Custom Night. There's a decent amount.
I can see that, because FNAF World, you do set up those minigames to get the Happiest Day minigame. You, as you saw on the screen, move the balloon boys up to the frame, up to the bots, because you have to, like, double-click Balloon Boy, I think 2 or 3 times in one of the nights. You move up the cupcakes because you have to go to the 4 different cameras in FNAF 3 on one of the other nights and click the cupcakes to get, like, the Chica's Party minigame to free Chica's soul. And then once you set all those minigames up, you're agreeing with Tets that says, it starts off with saying the iconic, like, FNAF 4 stuff where it's like, oh, where's all your friends? Do you still believe that? But then it says, the pieces are in place for you. Now it's up to you to go find them, which we do find them, which is the Happiest Day minigames in FNAF 3. Us putting the 4 original animatronics souls to rest in the Happiest Day minigame.
Amount of evidence linking FNAF World and Ultimate Custom Night. Not only are they both weird side games in the FNAF franchise, but some of their Easter eggs connect. Notably, if you don't have the achievement for the drowning ending in FNAF World, the one where you find Old Man Consequences and drown in his lake, but then in Ultimate Custom Night, you get the Old Man Consequences Easter egg and drown in his lake, the achievement triggers in FNAF World. These games are connected. And if they are, and if they're happening at the same time, then some of the marionette death lines are very interesting. First of all, we have...
The others are like...
I brought this up! See, I know my thing about this series. I know a thing or two.
Like animals, but I am very aware.
Which honestly isn't super relevant to the point I'm about to make, but it does lean into the idea that the FNAF 2 movie presents. One that the marionette can remotely control any of the FNAF 2 animatronics. But that's not what's important right now. What's important is the line,
I don't hate you, but you need to stay out of my way.
This line is incredibly interesting. As far as we're aware, everything in Ultimate Custom Night is created by one specific person to haunt and torture William Afton for the rest of time.
The vengeful spirit Cassidy, who is at least one of the spirits of Golden Freddy.
But here comes Charlotte Emily as the Mimic, essentially telling William, I'm not...
Wait, Mimic? Wait! Hold up! Obviously, yes, they said in the editor's note, they met Marionette, but my God, just imagine. Just imagine what the FNAF community would think if the puppet is tied to the Mimic program. That would be wild. And I can't even fathom it. I can't even process what I would think if that would happen, because it doesn't register in my brain. Like, that shouldn't even be possible. But just pure insanity for a second. Right. Let's dump into the ball pit of absurdity for a second. If that happened, first of all, it would make sense of how the puppet is able to remotely control animatronics like we do see in the movie. It would explain how, the others like animals following their program, but they are aware they are something that is above that, above just normal robot programming. That would explain some of those things. But man. Like, I'm trying to think, would that be the biggest twist in FNAF history? I'm trying to think. What other twists have there been in FNAF history that has been just very divided? FNAF 4, whether it's 1983 or 1987, has always been pretty divided. Dream Theory, the first 4 games being tied to Dream Theory, an event never ever happening. That was also pretty controversial. MatPat's theory of how Gregory was a robot. To me, none of those are on the same level as the puppet / marionette being tied to the mimic. Because remember, another thing about this, that if we're really taking this quite literally, obviously, once again, I realize it was a mistake. It was the editor's note. They meant marionette, not mimic. But, bear with me. We know that the mimic program is very important in the Pizza Plutz era of FNAF. Security Breach, Ruin, Help Wanted, 1 and 2, right? That era of FNAF. We know the Mimic program is front and center, quite literally. And it's always been a theory for years that Charlotte is possessing the Pizza Plutz as like a poltergeist. That's why there's a ton of the Nightmarion plushies throughout the Pizza Plutz, because they're haunting it. That's why you see the black and white light strips in the arcade where the El Chips Mexican restaurant is. Another nod to the puppet / Charlotte. And we know the animatronics in the Pizza Plutz are tied to the Mimic program. That's how they are quote-unquote evil. And the one who doesn't attack us is Freddy. And the reason why he doesn't attack us is because he's booted in safe mode. Ha. 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 Once again, it was a slip of the tongue, another word that starts with M that's also important in this series. But if you just stop and think about it and think about it quite literally, you're just like, wait a minute. Let's just think about that for a second. And I'm not saying it's true. I don't want it to be true, but there is some evidence that points to it. That's all I'm going to say. It doesn't sound crazy when you start thinking about it, does it?
Here to torture you. I don't care about you, but you're impeding what I am trying to do. What are you trying to do, Charlotte? Well, if FNAF World and Ultimate Custom Night are taking place at the same time, it could be Charlotte's thinking that some of the spirits are not able to move on so long as William Afton is still alive. In other words, she's moved on from hating William Afton. She just needs him to stop existing so the other spirits can find peace. Now,
Wait, play that again?
Still alive. Well, if FNAF World and Ultimate Custom Night are taking place at the same time, it could be Charlotte's thinking that some of the spirits are not able to move on so long as William Afton is still alive. In other words, she's moved on from hating William Afton. She just needs him to stop existing so the other spirits can find peace.
I mean, if it comes to Custom Night, I mean, there could be more, but at minimum, one spirit is keeping William Afton down here in Ultimate Custom Night in Hell in Purgatory as a punishment. They will not let them die because it's the vengeful spirit. It's Cassidy. The other spirits have moved on. Once again, I've always interpreted the core 4 animatronics, Freddy, Foxy, Bonnie, Chica, their souls have been laid to rest in FNAF 3 in the Happiest Day minigame. Right. But Cassie, the vengeful spirit, is the one you should not have killed. They're the one who's keeping them down there. So, is that implying that Cassidy versus Charlotte have different intentions, different goals with William Afton Custom Night? That's interesting.
Now, like a lot of older Five Nights at Freddy's characters, her story seems to end with the FNAF 6 fires. After all, there's really no mention of Charlotte Emily or the puppet in Help Wanted moving forward.
Security breach. Once again, explain why there's Night Marionette plushies littered all around the pizza plats. And a ton of other puppet imagery. Explain that, Steel Wool. Explain why, leading up to the Ruin DLC, there is a promotional poster where there's 2 Steel Wool logos. One is in the color purple, which is William Afton, the bad color. But then there's also on top of it an inverted logo of Steel Wool, the sheep, or goat. I don't know. I think it's a sheep, but anyways. In the green color, which is the puppet Charlotte, because of this minigame right here, the security puppet minigame from FNAF 6, where the puppet is trained to follow the kid with the green wristband. Green has always been Charlotte's color.
Now, there are Night Marionette plushes throughout Security Breach, Help Wanted 2, Ruin, etc., but Night Marionette is a loose connection. It's a Halloween variant of the Marionette, and it's the Night Marionette plushies that are all over. Interpretation of these is strange at best. I personally believe it's a representation of the VR games, but that's also speculative. Frankly, it's really weird and it doesn't super fit in anywhere, so for now, it's being left out.
What about the, once again, this sounds like a very obtuse, but first of all, think about what series we're talking about here. The stretch of light switch wires in the arcade, that is the black and white stripe pattern, which we know the black and white stripe pattern is tied to the puppet. Hold on one second. All right, there we go. We're back. What was this? Oh yeah, explain that the black and white stripe pattern of the lights in the arcade.
Already ran over a good amount of speculation,
And also explain the purple/green coloring on the Ruin DLC poster that I also brought up.
in the lore part of this video, because you kind of have to with Charlotte Emily. But there are some books that provide additional information that we don't get from the games directly, and looser evidence that I think is useful to bring in. But it's not in the Silver Eyes. In fact, I'm going to bring up a book you're probably not even thinking of. Five Nights at Freddy's Ticket to Fun.
Okay.
Because this isn't a book. It's a glorified toy box, but inside of it is a mini brochure for a lot of different things that happened at Fazbear locations. But the important thing to bring up for today's video is this page on
Party wristbands. I remember talking about the wristbands before.
Party Wristband,
I remember that.
which reads, Along with food, games, and entertainment, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza also hosts birthday parties. All parties are catered by our Freddy Fazbear's Pizza kitchen, and goodie bags and balloons are complimentary. Additionally, all children attending parties at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza are provided with wristbands as a souvenir of their time at our establishment and to easily track party attendees. Now, I mentioned earlier in the video that there is a debate on whether or not Charlotte Emily died at Fredbear's Family Diner or Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. But if you remember in the security puppet minigame, the Marionette is able to find Charlotte Emily because she was wearing that security wristband. The party wristband that's mentioned in this brochure as being a part of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, not Fredbear's Family Diner. To make it even more severe, this page has a UV lining, and if you take a black light to it, it shows the sprite from Security Puppet, the sprite of Charlotte being locked outside. This is damn near confirmation from an activity toy box that Charlotte Emily died in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, not Fredbear's Family Diner.
Also, I don't know if it's going to be brought up as well, but another reason why Freddy Fazbear's Pizza makes sense more than Fredbear's Family Diner is because, think about it. They mentioned the party wristbands are to track attendees. Why would you need to track attendees at the diner, the first location ever, canonically in the timeline? Why would you need to track the attendees at the first location ever? Or you have the wristbands to track attendees because there was an incident where kids were killed, and now you have the wristband to keep track of people. You have the security puppet, which is literally security to keep kids safe. Why would you do these protocols to keep kids safe if an incident did happen yet? Logically, an incident would have to happen, and this is your response so an incident doesn't happen again. I don't know if that's going to be brought up, but that's another thing I'm going to call out to verify that, yeah, it makes sense for it to be after the fact, not before.
This is why we stress out about lore in any location. This is why we looked at the coloring book for lore. You never know with this franchise.
Also, the cooking book. I know people got for the lore.
Now, this is very...
Yes, a cookbook. People got to see if there's Easter eggs. I don't believe there is, but that's how far we go in the series. Which, yeah, it's absurd, but you also have to remember a children's activity logbook has given us so much answers, and how we have so much knowledge of the series is because of that. Cassidy, being tied to the Vengeful Spirit, being tied to Golden Freddy, was first announced in that children's activity logbook. Cassidy is such an important name, isn't it? But it was set up in a security logbook.
important to the timeline, because since it's guaranteed to have taken place in a...
The potential name of the FNAF World crime child being Evan or David or Dave is also in that security logbook.
Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, she could not have been killed before 1983. Now, I would personally argue that this means she must have died after the crying child was bit, which then gives William motivation to kill her, but there's no hard evidence for that.
Yes. At least that's one interpretation. Because there had to have been a reason why William Afton kills Henry's daughter. And that is what makes the death timeline confusing as heck, is because who is the first death? Right. Is it the FNAF World crime child in this incident? Is it Henry's daughter? Is it Chica, Susie? Because, oh, I'm the first, I'm the one who's seen everything. The death order is so complicated because each one has evidence to be the first. But if that person is the first, then you have to ignore the evidence for these other two characters for them being the first, right? Like, if the FNAF World Crown Child is the first victim, and that gave William Afton a motive to kill Henry's daughter Charlotte out of spite because, you know, his kid's now dead after we believe the spring lock suits are made by Henry, and now, hey, your animatronic creations killed my son, now I'm going to take my revenge out and kill your child. That gives him a motive, which we know that Steel Wool has hammered it time and time and time again, that William Afton's not just some, you know, monster who just kills for the fun of it. They have a backstory. They have a tragedy. They have a reason to do killing. They're not just doing it for the fun of it. Something happened to them to then cause them to lash out and do that. So, right there, that makes sense because you have a motive. But if the FNAF World Crown Child's first, then you have to ignore lines from Chica/Susie saying, I'm the first, I'm the one who said everything. You also have to ignore, we believe, Cassette Man is Henry, in the tapes in FNAF 6, where in the Insanity ending, he says, you know, a wound first inflicted on me that lets spread to others. A wound first inflicted on me being his daughter's death, Charlotte. That lets spread to others, meaning future kids being killed. So, a wound first inflicted on me, but then wouldn't that make the FNAF World Crown Child first? Then how is Henry's wound first inflicted first? And how does Susie, I'm the one who's seen everything, I was the first, how does that fit in? So you see why the death order is so confusing. But if Henry's daughter's first, right? Because if you take the line, you know, a wound first inflicted on me that lets spread to others. If we take that literally, it's like, okay, so that makes sense. But then once again, you have to ignore Susie's line again. But you also have to question, well, then why? Why did William Afton kill Henry's daughter? What was the motive? Why did he do it? Because it was a drunk night? I refuse to believe that. So then what was the reason for it? That doesn't fit cleanly then. Right? There was a reason he did it. Why? So that doesn't make sense if Henry's daughter was first. So you wonder why the death order is very, very confusing.
So, with all of this evidence in mind, who is Charlotte Emily? And what is the timeline surrounding her character? Charlotte Emily was the only daughter of Henry Emily, co-owner of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a perfectly normal child who was just a victim of circumstance and her father's overly trusting nature. Unaware as to what was being brewed in the mind of William Afton, one day some bullies locked Charlotte Emily outside of a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and it was that fateful day that an angry William Afton was coming to pay a visit. Seeing the opportunity, he killed Charlotte Emily in the alleyway and drove off. But the Marionette...
Again, why is he angry? What was the reason? Is it because out of jealousy that Henry is the better animatronic inventor than William Afton will ever be? His business was more successful, and that's what made him jealous. And it's, oh, you're better at this, I'm jealous and envy, so I'm going to take it out on something that you like. Like, I guess that also is a motive, but it still doesn't fit cleanly.
Still tried to chase her down due to her security bracelet, and due to the heavy rain, was malfunctioning along the way, eventually collapsing on top of her, as the two lay there, freshly dead, together. And it was in that moment that Charlotte Emily's spirit goes on to possess the Marionette. But she remembers what happened. She remembered that William killed her, and she couldn't rest until he was finally brought to justice. So for some time, she remained, looking for an opportunity to catch William Afton in the act, to show her father the kind of man William Afton truly was. But after some time, some new spirits entered the pizzeria. Spirits that remained there but didn't know that they were dead. 5 children happily playing together in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Surely something was wrong, and Charlotte Emily had to help them find out the truth. She showed them each of their own bodies, stuffed into the animatronics. And when she did that, one by one, their memories returned to them. And it was in that moment that they would have been able to find peace and rest, but they had other plans as well. William Afton was still off being dangerous. They couldn't let him get away with this. However, William Afton proved more cunning than they were aware of. At the FNAF 2 location, she tried to cut him off with Withered Freddy, but he either outsmarted or overpowered them, and they failed. They tried to attack men that looked like him, but they were either wrong or unable to finish the job. It wasn't until one day that his greed became so great that it became his undoing. Keeping them trapped in the suits wasn't enough. He needed more material. So he went to the FNAF 1 location after it had closed and began to take apart the animatronics piece by piece, night after night. But all this did was allow those spirits to roam freely throughout the pizzeria. And it was on that last night, when he came back for just a little bit more material, that the spirits of those animatronics attacked. They cornered him in a back room, and in a panic, he put on the Spring Bonnie suit and died. But again...
I wonder... Actually, no. I was to say... I wonder if we'll see a scene in a FNAF 3 movie, but then I was like, well, actually, no. Because we saw the spring lock ending at the end of FNAF 1. So, very curious what FNAF 3 is going to be all about. Anyway, unrelated.
Charlotte remained. According to the character encyclopedia, she had a way to sense that he was still around, and she waited to make sure he'd stay down. Until one day, when she was tricked by an animatronic bear. One built by her very own father. One built with the express purpose to lure the marionette, encapsulate it inside of it, fuse itself to it, transport it to the FNAF 6 location, and extract Charlotte Emily inside. In other words, the marionette was captured by Lefty, and Charlotte Emily was brought to the FNAF 6 location just before the fire. And like the rest of the company in the building, they were all burned away and began to find peace. But Charlotte Emily realized that several of the spirits were still stuck and unable to rest. And it's there and then that she began using the memories of the victims in the fire to help them achieve rest, creating FNAF World, helping spirits like the crying child finally rest after all these years. And that's Charlotte Emily. I know it's a bit out there at certain moments, but I do think that for the most...
So, FNAF World is after FNAF 6? Interesting. My brain just immediately goes to, after FNAF 6, you set up the minigames in FNAF 3. So that's obviously a precursor to FNAF 3. So does that mean FNAF 6... FNAF World / Custom Night, and then FNAF 3 is after all that? Maybe. Although, we know that Burn Trap, or Scrap Trap I should say, different variations. Scrap Trap from FNAF 6, the animatronic suit looks different following the Fazbear Fright fire that we saw at the end of FNAF 3. FNAF 6 is after FNAF 3.
For the most part, this is a pretty agreeable timeline for her character. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Am I way off, or did I get kind of close?
So, I don't know. As always, good theory. Lot to think about, lot to chew on. Quite literally and figuratively. But I would say as we are wrapping up here and just thinking about it, what do I think about the puppet? The story? What's going on here? Also, one other thing that I just thought about as we are wrapping up here, another connection I had with the puppet in the Pizzaplex is in the Blob, one of the animatronic heads we see is the Marionette puppet mask. Just want to call that out as well. This is another thing to throw out there of the puppet imagery being very clear in the pizza plets, somehow still. So, anyways, I would say, I don't know if this is just me, but as someone who has been keeping up with the series ever since it started in FNAF 1 days, and I've been addicted to the story and lore and Easter eggs and theories ever since then, and hell, that's why I started doing these FNAF videos to begin with, is because how much I enjoy it, how much I enjoy hearing theories, and how much I enjoy people's reactions, people's thoughts, and trying to piece a story together as much as I am. That's why I started this to begin with. But Charlotte as a character has confused me. Whether they are a hero, a good person, or a villain. Because on one hand, they're a hero because they show the 5 missing kids that they were killed by William Afton. They need to exact revenge. Something that's heroic and a good thing to do. But then you have something like the movie where Charlotte is like the main antagonist of the movie. So are they a good person? Are they a bad person? It's kind of confusing. So I don't know if they're good or bad. It's hard to say. To me, it's interchangeable. To me, but the thing is, I don't think it's as aggressive as Michael Afton, who also, story-wise, seems to be interchangeable whether they are a good or a bad person. I think it's more lean towards bad because, well, stuff that Michael Afton does is not something that you typically want in an older brother. Just saying. Typical good older brother behavior is not shoving your scared to death younger brother into a deadly animatronic head into the mouth and have them get bit. Obviously, the biting part was an accident, but shoving your younger brother who's scared to death in the mouth of an animatronic, not something a good person does it?